in my family, we were shopping in Temecula recently, and apparently there was like some gang people, and they were watching, and they were making fun of us signing because we were signing. And so my wife pulled out 100 Signs basic booklet that we have here at DawnSign Press that we produced, and she walked over and gave it to the kids. And as we walked away, we looked, and they were all looking. And so they looked, and they said, "Hi, my name." So they were learning right there on the spot. And it was
so
like,
cool.
hey, we can get past this.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to Pick Class and Gym Class. I'm Lacey Henderson, and this week I sit down with deaf entrepreneur Joe Dannis, who launched his own media company to provide children with hearing loss books and videos to enjoy.
Joe, it's great to be here. We are actually in your office, your studio. You do a lot of stuff here at DawnSign.
Yes, yeah. All kinds of different projects. We're not just a publishing company that sells, but we're a production company. We do design. We design our own books and videos. We sell direct to people and through wholesale. I didn't realize this is a complicated business I run here. It's much more complicated than I thought when I started.
A lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts, for sure.
Yes.
I was also told that it's your 40th anniversary this year for the business, so congratulations.
Yeah, 40. More than half of my life I've been working in this business.
You must have started when you were 2.
It wasn't easy. I wanted to give up so many times, 1,000 times. And back then I didn't realize, but now I do realize my family, my friends, and the signing deaf community really supported me and encouraged me. They said, be stubborn, don't give up, don't give up. So with that support, it really kept me strong and persistent, and I eventually did break through.
The origin of DawnSign actually has a really cool story behind it. Will you tell me about the graduation gift that started it all?
Back then, it was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, way back then, deaf people were told that they couldn't own a business or couldn't set up a business. So my family grew up with that stigma attached, but my parents said, no, you can do it. And in the 60s and 70s, people were a little more progressive, and I thought, wait a minute, I can do it. And my family always encouraged me to think that I could. So I decided I did want to set up a business, and we looked at a few different things like an ice cream store, or should we get a McDonald's franchise? That was too expensive. So I thought, well, let's start with the t-shirt business. And so my father gave me $1,000 for my college graduation to start. And $1,000 can buy you a lot of t-shirts in the 70s.
Yeah, I believe that. I think you and I were very different people as college graduates with $1,000. So you started with a t-shirt company, and then I'm sure as the company progressed, you saw that there was more needs for ASL, for American Sign Language, and other aspects besides maybe just selling t-shirts.
I started to distribute different books. I mean, I didn't want to sell t-shirts forever, and in businesses you have to adapt and change.
Yeah.
If you don't change, you're done, you're out of business. So I started to distribute other products, and by distributing those products, I added books, signaling devices for deaf people, alarms with lights, doorbells with lights.
Oh, cool.
And from distribution, I really learned what people wanted and what people needed. So we started to produce more things. The first was coloring books. So often in coloring books, there were a few that had signs, but they weren't clear. So we could do a better job. You know, I was thinking big then, but we started small. So we started with coloring book, and then the book took off. Those books took off, and we grew from there. And also the interest in American Sign Language has grown an incredible amount from that time to now. Earlier days, deafness, being deaf, was thought of as a disease. My dad told stories about how if he would come up to a girl, they would say, "Ooh, you're deaf." Now, when I was younger, they thought being deaf was weird, and they knew that I was different. But I look at somebody like my son, and his time, all of his friends, even hearing kids, might be able to sign hi. And people are so much more friendlier. They're willing to learn signs, so times have really changed. I mean, we've been in it for the ride, DawnSign Press. So we were producing sign language at a time when the demand was growing.
Yeah.
So I was in the right place at the right time for ASL, and I had a little luck.
Yeah, that's exactly, I say that a lot. Like, you need to be smart, but sometimes you need a little luck. Absolutely.
So true.
I do a lot of stuff with disability awareness, normalizing people who are different. And I know that there is kind of like this weird nuance with the deaf community because it's known as a invisible disability.
Yes.
I had heard that there was a story, actually, if you will tell the story, one time you were pulled over by a police officer and you couldn't read his lips.
Oh, yeah. It was nighttime, and I was driving through town. The police pulled me over, and he was on a motorcycle, and he had a helmet.
Oh, okay.
So he was talking through the helmet with the visor closed, and I was saying, "I'm deaf." So I walked back to my car to get my hearing aid because I wasn't wearing it. And of course, he assumed I was going to drive away or resisting arrest, maybe. And I was just going in my glove compartment. I mean, of course, today I wouldn't do that.
That's
this
terrifying.
was in the 70s.
Yeah.
I would just stand with my hands up these days. But then he arrested me on the spot, said I was resisting arrest. They put me in jail overnight. That was the worst night of my life. And my sister bailed me out. I had to get a lawyer. And we did sue the city, and we won the case. We didn't sue for money, but Hayward was where it was. We required that Hayward Police Department trained their officers, and they did receive training how to deal with deaf people better. So there's so many instances where deaf people are arrested and put in a psychiatric ward because their response looks overblown. When you put a deaf person in handcuffs, it stops them from communicating.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to expose people to the kind of difficulties that deaf people have in dealing with the police. But back then, they didn't understand. There were a lot of assumptions about who deaf people are. And as sign language is recognized as a language, and American Sign Language, the recognition started in the 60s and 70s. We're past that now. And so now it's more looking for human rights. Like, it's not about, it isn't discrimination as much, but we have a right to language. Many people think it's how well you can hear and talk, but it's all about language. If you have good language, then you can do anything, regardless of the language. Reading and writing is important, but now we have a new battle with cochlear implants and technology improving. Those things are fine for people who want it and who benefit from it, but it's important to give people a choice and also inform them about ASL. Are we giving enough information about sign language, about different ways to teach oral communication? So that's something that we're trying to do, fill in the gap and producing information about ASL to help people understand American Sign Language better.
Yeah, I think like humanity, the whole thing we're striving towards is connection, and so much of that is our communication with each other. And you know, we think about language, and I think that people forget that language is a huge part of forming culture. And I think, like, since ASL is its own language, it has to also come with its own culture.
Yes, very much. That's very true. In Europe, many bilingual people are in Europe.
Yeah.
But they look at the United States as kind of stupid for not encouraging bilingualism or multilingualism. Because the more languages that you have, it's good. It's good for your brain.
Yeah, well, communication.
It's good for people.
Yeah. That's kind of the cool thing as I've been watching the DawnSign videos, that I think you guys do a really excellent job of including hearing people to the deaf community, to seeing like the way that the communication is different. It is a little bit more expressive, but it's been cool. Those videos are actually super cool. Speaking of Europeans, I was curious because I had recently found out other countries have other forms of sign language. Have you ever run into communication problems with another deaf person that speaks a different sign language?
No. Because part of sign language includes some mime and gesture, expressions, body language.
Yeah.
You know, you can see a lot of it, and it's all included in language. We all have some of those elements in us, whether we use sign or not.
Absolutely.
But we need to learn how to express them. So when I go to Europe, we can gesture a lot. And even with hearing people who naturally gesture, I do notice when I go to Mexico and I would gesture with people who speak Spanish, especially older generation, they will gesture a lot.
Yeah.
Younger generations, I would say how much, and you know, gesture, how much? 10, 15, and they would use a calculator to show you the price.
You're like, eh.
They don't gesture as much as the older generation.
Yeah.
And that's an example for Mexico. But in Europe, when I'm traveling, I love to travel and like go to Italy, of course.
I am
There's
Italian,
a lot
yeah.
of gesturing in that sense.
I figured, I'm like, you probably do great in Italy. So going from t-shirts to videos to other forms of media, you saw that there was a need, but where did you start finding like the creative resources to go pursue that? Like, what will you tell me about, like deaf artists? Will you tell me a little bit about like the culture that you've been able to kind of blend into showcasing like the culture in and of itself, but also making it an educational platform for other people?
So really technology is key. When VHS was born, when it was new, that was a great innovation. It was a visual medium that we could watch and learn language. So I was forced to get into learning about video production, how that worked, how to work with a post house. So VHS was really my start in visual medium for language instruction. And we could really show ASL on video in a VHS format. But it was hard to convince educators, people who were used to books, buying just a book or learning from an illustration in a book. And I say, no, now with the video, you can watch, you can see the person signing. So that was one way that instructional materials took off. And then when we transitioned to DVD, early 2000s, around 2000 something, it was much easier to convince people to follow that visual medium because they already understood the value of ASL in a visual mode. But I remember for VHS when that was new, it was really hard. We had to shrink wrap the book with the VHS and the bookstores would complain. But now with DVDs, it made it easier, and now with streaming, we're streaming our videos now, and that makes it even easier. You don't even have to have a DVD. So technology, we really follow the evolution. And as a small business, I'm always chasing technology. Slow down technology, but it won't slow down. So we just change and adapt. And I notice when we do something new, we buy new software, it always blows up. Technology isn't perfect either. It isn't as perfect as people like to think. There are challenges, there's bugs, you have to test, you have to resolve different problems for different customers. It's swell, it's cool, but it does come with a host of problems too.
Yeah, I mean, trying anything new definitely has the ups and downs, for sure. Where do you find your talent? Where do you find your artists that contribute to the videos?
From the deaf community. It's a small world.
That's true.
But when there are some areas where we can't fill in with deaf talent, we try to find hearing people who might be able to fill some of those gaps. If they have a good attitude, they're motivated to learn. Maybe some already sign, which is always awesome. But if they have a good attitude and they're willing to learn, I would give time to that person if they have a specialty. And so we hire them, we work together, and hope that their techniques, their skills rub off on deaf people too, because deaf people sometimes have limited options. Where here it gives deaf people an opportunity to experience working and learning with hearing professionals, and then it becomes a real bye-bye workplace.
Yeah. Well, and I think like
bilingual, bicultural.
Multicultural, yeah, for sure. I think that there's so much to be said for combining like the mainstream world to the disability world, because you find more things in common than differences. At least in my experience, even with sport, like we're all the same. We just are working with a few different variables. But going back to talking about
That's so true, yeah.
Yeah. Going about talking about the like advancements in technology, and another thing that I've seen kind of blowing up on social media, I believe is called what y'all are calling MuSign right now. So interpreters coming to concerts and making it an experience for the deaf community.
Yes. MuSign is actually something different. It's sign language mime and dance group that I was involved in the 70s and 80s. And we would perform while the song was playing, and we would move and sign and follow the beat. And what you're talking about, concert interpreting, you will have a person on the stage sometimes, and they are interpreting the lyric and the music. And it does look like a performance in signed song, but it's not really a performance. I would rather watch the band myself. I would rather watch Mick Jagger dance than look at an interpreter.
That's true.
So that's just me. But sometimes the interpreter is very expressive and more animated than the singer sometimes, or the presenter. So that happens too.
That's true, but I feel like if you're gonna pay for Mick Jagger, you probably want to see Mick Jagger.
Right, exactly.
Are you finding as the years progress and as society becomes more plugged in through social media, through the internet, through technology, are you finding that you are running into more people that that know ASL, that can sign with you, and that are eavesdropping on your conversations?
Yes. Growing up, my family's deaf, my parents are deaf, and my sister. So when we would sign in public, my parents would say, keep your hands down, keep your hands under the table, people are looking. So we would sign under the table at a restaurant, for example, because we didn't want to be embarrassing. You don't sign in public. People looked at us as animals. That was the concept then. So over the years, it has changed to being very open about signing, and I'm just amazed that so many people know a little bit of sign language. I meet on an airplane or at the airport. It's just thrilling for me as a deaf person. Of course, in the Midwest, the coasts have a little bit of different, more knowledge. The Midwest and some of the Deep South maybe still is under aware. So I try to have influential people in those areas spread out that knowledge. Back then, deaf people would stay together where there would be a deaf school or a large deaf community, but today, the millennial kids, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
Deaf kids could be anywhere, and everybody wants a good life. They have a phone, they have maybe a few friends. So values are changing compared to when I was a kid.
But that is interesting, because it makes me think about those internet videos you see where it's like, oh, this baby with a disability hears mother's voice for the first time, which is great, but there still needs to be tools of communication, and not shy away, and not say that the disability community, or that the deaf community rather, is limited, because the ironic thing is that there really are no limitations.
Yeah, I'm worried that now that schools are mainstreaming deaf people and there's fewer deaf schools and there's fewer deaf schools where children are learning in sign language.
Yeah.
More and more kids are put into mainstream situations. And I find for myself, I'm the only deaf person. When I was growing up, I thought I didn't think I was the only deaf person because my family was deaf too. But many of these deaf kids who are born into hearing families, they might think I'm the only deaf person in the world. So many of those people have grown up and maybe even gotten to high school, and they get out into the world and they finally meet another deaf person. That happened to my parents.
Ugh.
They both spoke. They had oral education in Alabama. They grew up, and when they graduated, they finally met other deaf people, and they learned to sign later in life. So the internet causes more exposure, or provides more exposure, but there's still a lot of people who don't have the internet too.
Yeah.
And then you include the rest of the world, we still do have a long way to go.
Yeah.
But it's good to increase their awareness. The more exposure, that's all we can do. That's the best that we can do.
I think, again, like being from a marginalized or a minority community like the deaf community, there is still something special about finding a group of people who can share that experience with you on top of being able to integrate to the mainstream world, because like we constantly adapt to the mainstream world every day. It's nice when they adapt to us, but it's really good to have your friends in that community going through it with you. So being a part of the deaf community, you also have something else unique about you. You're left-handed.
Oh, yes. I am a lefty. Lefties do it right.
Hey, that's true.
This is another way to sign right. In ASL, there's 3 different ways to sign right. It's funny, I didn't know when I joined theater and I had to sign right-handed, because when we were performing, everybody else was signing right-handed and I was the only lefty. So I had to train myself to sign right-handed, and I was always a split second behind. When we were doing DawnSign, we're supposed to be signing together.
Joe, thank you so much for coming to the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned a ton about the deaf community, and I'm really honored to be in your office and to share some time with you today.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to be here with you too, and it's been a great chat. Good luck spreading the good word.
I do what I can. Thank you. Thank you
for watching this week's episode. Head to dcpofficial.com to subscribe to the Pick Class and Gym Class podcast, where you can hear an extended conversation with Joe.